You're watching the Brotherhood of Gaming video game review show, the only video game review show that still uses words like awesome possum. I am your host, William Morris, and that's actually relevant to our video game review.
Rocket Knight Adventures is a classic action-adventure side-scrolling platformer which debuted on the Sega Genesis back in 1993.
For those of you who don't know, Rocket Knight has had one hell of a legacy, even though unfortunately, sad to say, it might not have amounted to much. However, he is still a widely familiar and iconic character that is beloved, and like a lot of other hundreds of famous icons, has managed to have a cult following.
There is a lot of awesome stuff to cover with this character, but I'll get to that. But let's start with the story. I talked about this before, about how way back in the early days of video gaming, you weren't always told outright what the background of your adventure was. More common back then, the developers relied on books and manuals to explain what the objective was, as well as explaining the world around you and your character's motivations. Of course today we have cutscenes to do all of that for us, but back then it was like a real adventure, man, and you had to work to be in the know-how about why things were happening.
Rocket Knight Adventures actually has a very huge build-up and setup to the story. However, unless you had the video game's instruction manual, odds are you probably weren't aware of it at the time. Or at least until now.
The world in which Rocket Knight takes place is called Elhorn, which has a kingdom called Zephyrus. A long time ago, the first king of the land fought to protect the world of Elhorn from the evil pig invaders who sailed the galaxy in their pig star. Basically, think of the Death Star just with a lot more oink. The king then, with his followers, defeated the invaders and sealed away the pig star, preventing it from falling into the evil hands. Apparently, since legend says that it's capable of destroying planets. Oh, is it? The key to the seal would for generations be passed on through the royal family. However, neighboring countries feared the power and/or craved it for themselves, attempting to take it. The kingdom henceforth created a unit of protectors called Rocket Knights, who donned armor complete with rocket jetpacks, armed with mystical swords, and having awesome skills in combat. Such Rocket Knights include a character named Mifune and Axel Gear. Unfortunately, during the wars, a young possum quickly became orphaned and was taken in by Mifune, whom was a close friend of the king, and decided to train the little possum as his adoptive son into a warrior. This possum's name is Sparkster, our main character. Sometime later, Axel Gear betrayed the kingdom, seeking more power through a book about the Rocket Knights, but was caught by Mifune. Unfortunately, Mifune was not only defeated by Axel, but permanently disabled from there on. Sparkster was incredibly angered by this, and would become the new leader of the Rocket Knights, but for 10 years searched for Axel to execute justice on him for his adoptive father's sufferings. Finally sensing Axel's presence, it turns out that he's allied with an enemy empire led by the Deviligious Devatindos, whom with his own army and hypnotic powers assault the kingdom, where the game begins.
Jesus, this is heavy.
Psh, it's not that great. Whoa, I am so sorry.
Yeah, you bet you're sorry. You do not talk bad about Rocket Knight while I am in the room!
I never thought you'd take it like this, William.
Apologize!
I already did.
Say you like Rocket Knight.
I like Rocket Knight.
Say you love the Sega Genesis.
Oh, come on, really?
Say it!
I love Sega Genesis.
Okay, where was I?
When you start the game, you immediately know that you are headed for something grand. Intros back then didn't take much to get you excited, and this one is no exception. Once the level begins, the fun starts. Everything is so neat looking, the background is alive, there's just so much life going on. All of it's on fire, but it's still alive, and it makes the experience feel like something bigger, you know? Games like Mario and Sonic were definitely good at what they were doing, and so is Rocket Knight in all aspects. But the feel of the game, the world around you, made it feel like you weren't isolated. There was stuff going on around you, good or bad, you didn't know, but you knew it was there. That's how good the level design is. Everything feels alive, and it gets you so immersed into its world that you can get lost in it and totally forget to take out the trash and risk being grounded. But you know what? It was worth it. And the gameplay. Oh, the gameplay. You want an example of tight controls where you feel like you're in perfect control? Then play Super Castlevania 4. But also, play Rocket Knight Adventures. Why? Well, first of all, it's very simple. Simplicity makes the game easy to play and fun because you don't have too many buttons doing God knows what. The only buttons you need to worry about are A and B, just like Mario, and just like Sonic. A was the attack button and B is the jump. But just with those buttons alone, it wasn't limited on what you could do. By holding down the attack button, Sparkster would immediately start charging his rocket pack, just like in Mega Man. And depending on what direction you were holding, Sparkster would, like a bullet in that direction, damaging anything in that path, or helping you reach certain treats. If you were holding nothing at all, Sparkster would instead spin like crazy with the sword. And wait, there is more! The attack alone just didn't swing the sword, no, but every time you swung, a beam would shoot out and hurt anything that touched it. And man, I've got to tell you how good it feels to hit things with this sword. The sounds and flashing lights you hear and see when constantly striking an enemy. It's so satisfying, you can feel the intensity of just how bad you are f***ing this thing up. And the gratification when you suddenly hear it go boom, 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 boom! You know, there is also a lot of versatility in Rocket Knight Adventures. While for the most part it's a linear platforming action-adventure game, it also has levels of flight and machine boxing.
As great as all of that is, I haven't even begun to mention this game's greatest feature yet, which, by now, you've probably been listening to it. Hell, it's the music!
Wow, the music is, well, you know what? Just shut up and listen. Turn up your headphones.
If you haven't been convinced by now that Rocket Knight Adventures is not a classic game worthy of being in your video game collection, then, well, you are a robot, and get out of here.
Is Rocket Knight Adventures perfect? Well, hard to say. I mean, it definitely accomplished what it tried to do. Back in the early 90s of gaming, particularly known as the animal mascot era, a lot of developers tried their damnedest to create a character that would stick and live on and be just as successful as Sonic the Hedgehog was. And Konami with Rocket Knight actually succeeded. Being proclaimed the second biggest prodigy since the famed Hedgehog, not only being well received by critics and gamers alike for its amazing graphics and music and gameplay, but it was also rewarded a mark not only being one of SEGA's best games, but one of the best platformers ever made at the time. And with that, it was promised a sequel. And not only did it get its sequel, Sparkster the Rocket Knight received a spin-off, but those are different tales. The point is, Sparkster made it to the big time, where the other mascots had fallen short, to being simply subpar or downright failures. Though others were ambitious and captivated audience of their own, Sparkster the Rocket Knight had something more, and millions never forgot about him. So much so that, by popular demand, a third installment was made and released almost 20 years later. Did it live up to its predecessors? Well, that's all subjective, but most were happy just to see their possum pal back in action once again. even if it was potentially for the last time.
But who knows? Maybe Sparkster still has stories to tell and hype to bring. But until then, only time will tell. But we can always go back to the original for our sure enjoyment that will never go away. You know, a Super Nintendo version of this game was in the works, but unfortunately it got cancelled long before it was ever even fully greenlit. But I digress. Sparkster will always be a great game that is worthy of being in your collection, and it will always be a classic that everybody will remember the fondly of. Until next time, you've been watching the Brotherhood of Gaming Video Game Review Show. I am your host, William Morris. And as always, please feel free to comment below to tell us your memories of the game, or if you plan to play it. Subscribe to our show. Check out our Twitter, Facebook, Twitch channel for all sorts of updates and streams and goodies that you might not even know are appearing. And we'll see you next time with another video game review or anything else that we just happen to come up with. You never know.